Fall was the season of beginnings, a new hunting season, a new grade in school, and chokecherries. Chokecherries, I thought, must be God's favorite tree. For not only did the berries make the best jelly in the universe, but the trees always grew best next to a good trout stream. One clear, early fall Sunday, we drove the Model A north of town to a dilapidated old farm to buy a milking goat my father paid $10 for. It was my job to take care of Nanny. My father's job was to milk her, and Mother's to strain and refrigerate the milk and skim off the rich white cream. Goat's milk was said to be healthy, especially for children. Nanny was a smart, sweet goat, and soon she was following me like a pup. I pastured Nanny on the creek bank. Then I would tie her to a stake on a long cotton rope and go about my business playing Hop-Along Cassidy. When Nanny came fresh, she had twins, little brown kids with a white streak down their faces. They chased each other in circles and climbed on everything and chewed on everything. I fed them out of a bottle so we could milk Nanny. Then one day one of the kids was gone, and for supper we had the best and sweetest meat I'd ever eaten. "What's this meat?" I asked. No one answered. I got up from the table and looked out the kitchen window into the backyard. "Where is Jupiter?" I asked, referring to the missing kid. "We couldn't keep Jupiter," my father said. "Are we eating Jupiter?" I asked. After a long moment, my father said in his quiet voice, "Yep, we're eating Jupiter." My mother said, "Remember, son, God put goats on the earth for man's health and for his sustenance. We mustn't forget that." On that day, at that moment, there at that kitchen table, I began the irreversible slide out of innocence. How could you eat your friends and be a Christian? In Wyoming, fall can have a heart attack and die in one day. The heavy snows came often before we had our flannels on. In the winter, which could come as early as October, we went sledding on Tank Hill, where the town's water tank rose up like a great windowless castle. In Wyoming, spring fought birth like a child who dreads its fate. Yet finally it came bursting, in song and smell and the fuzzy touch of buds and the primal deep hug of life. We raised chickens in springtime in our backyard in Sheridan. We bought the baby chicks for 6 cents each, little yellow, fuzzy, peeping balls. We brought them home in a cardboard box, and at night we hung a light bulb over the box and covered the box to keep the baby chicks warm. We fed them ground corn, and we put water for them in an empty tuna fish can, and the chicks grew nearly overnight. Soon they graduated to the chicken house, and soon after that they grew into fryer size. A couple became our Sunday dinners, chicken and dumplings and chicken with noodles. The rest went into mason jars for winter. The eggs we didn't eat we stored for winter's use in a 10-gallon crock filled with water glass, a soupy silicone jelly that sealed the pores of the eggs so they were slow to rot. In the summer, the family rented the 2 spare bedrooms as well as my room to the tourists, 50 cents a night. For a long time I remained mortified by the fact that our family had to take in lodgers. My room rented last because it was upstairs, and the renter had to climb up and down the stairs to get to the bathroom. In the summertime I slept on an army cot in the backyard in our old hunting tent, which my father pitched under the chokecherry tree. After breakfast, my mother and I would wash the tourist sheets of the night before, and I would hang them out in the backyard to dry. And when they were dry, I brought them in by the armfuls. The smell of the cottons fresh and clean. The next day I ironed the sheets on the kitchen ironing board, and after the tourists had gone, I made up the beds with clean-pressed linens. To the horror of my mother, some of the tourists smoked in the rooms. She would open the windows and complain strongly about such people, who fouled not only God's temple but our home as well. When I had earned several dollars from the rental of my room, I rode my bike to the First National Bank of Sheridan, the money and my little green savings deposit book tucked safely in my overalls. I put my money away in what was known as my college fund. The promise was that if I studied hard and behaved myself, I'd grow up and go off to college, and with God's help, I might thereafter make something of myself. Summer was canning time. I can hear the spitting sound of the old pressure cooker, the escaping steam filling the room with the smell of cooking. By fall, one side of the basement was lined with shelves brimming with jars of fruits and vegetables. In the late summer, when the canning specials were on at Piggly Wiggly, my mother bought peaches and apricots by the bushel, plums and cherries by the box, and sugar by the 100-pound sack, and hauled them all home and canned them all. She canned the beets and beans and peas and tomatoes and corn from the garden. Then it was fall, hunting season again, and she canned elk and deer and antelope. I thought my mother was the canningest woman who ever lived. I thought she would have canned salvation in pickle juice and holiness in salt brine if she'd had half a chance. I thought my mother's bargain with life was a pretty good one. She made as much money for the family by her work at home as she could have made had she worked at the dime store for 10 cents an hour, and she got to stay at home and raise her family. Besides, we didn't need to be a family with 2 working parents. In those days, we didn't have to buy automatic washing machines and dryers, and we didn't have to own a dishwasher and 2 cars and a couple of television sets. In those days, we didn't have deep freezes and TV dinners. We never heard of pizza, and today's franchise restaurants hadn't yet been invented. My mother owned 2 Sunday dresses, one black and one red, and her clothes and my father's, one navy blue Sunday suit, all fit into one small closet. My father wore a white shirt and the same blue tie he'd had for Lord knows how many years. Such were all the clothes anyone needed, the excess of which would have been sin and vanity. I owned 1 pair of Sunday shoes and 1 pair of school boots, the lace-up kind with the knife pocket on the side. I wore to school my 1 pair of knickers with their deer-hide patches at the knees, and I had 1 itchy wool Sunday suit and a Sunday hat. I thought my mother was more free than many mothers today. She never had to give up her role as mother to a daycare center or to babysitters. She never had to surrender to the demands of the good life, because to her she had a good life, a loving husband, and a son whom she had secretly given to God. She was her own boss, and the boss of the house as well, and she was good at it. She paid the bills, and what little credit we had was good. We owed no money to the banks. In those days, in the twilight of the Great Depression, my parents were solvent. They were employed, and they had a little put away for a rainy day. But in the end, the value of my mother's labor didn't inure to the benefit of the family. Any excess over and above the bare necessities my father provided out of his paycheck also did not accrue to the family's betterment. My father and mother invested the best part of my father's savings and my mother's home labor in that very dear insurance policy, and years later, when he needed it, it proved inadequate to pay a week's stay in the hospital, much less enough to take care of his widow for even part of the year. Over the years, I evened the score against that industry, not once, but hundreds of times. When a case against an insurance company came up for settlement, I, representing the widows or orphans or the horribly maimed, would set a just goal in dollars. Then at the last minute, my settlement offer would go up. Not much, maybe only $10,000. Like the $10,000 policy my parents labored most of their lifetimes to pay for,